All right, so we're here today to talk about some of the most frequent deadlifting questions that we all get, so you guys can quit asking them all the time and just watch this video. So I'm sure one of the ones that all three of you guys get all the time is, what do I do to get stronger off the floor, or what do I do to get stronger at lockout? You know, it seems like everyone's good at one and bad at the other. So, discuss.
To me, let's see, what I usually reach for real quick for like off the floor strength is I have people do pause deadlifts where they break the bar off the ground like an inch or 2 inches and just hold it there, usually for a 2 count or a 3 count, and then complete the pull. So like they're holding the whole weight in that bottom position, so they're getting a lot of tension in the bottom. And it's like a lot of time under tension there for them. I get stronger doing that.
Yeah, something really simple that I think helped me the most with my floor speed was actually dropping the bands, because I became so band dependent. And what I was theorizing to myself when I was going through the transition, I was locking out maybe 75 or 80%, but where I was the most efficient, I was breaking the ground with the least amount of weight. So I was anywhere from 50 to 60% of my max from the floor. And it didn't make sense, because we were always taught acceleration through the top would teach you acceleration from the floor. But if you're not demanding yourself to break the floor with more and more progressive weight, it's not going to happen. So I started using straight weight in the 65 to 75% range. And I also started always pulling from a 1 inch deficit when I was doing the explosive type work that I do, or the rep work. The heavier pulls that I would do was always from the ground. But when I was really trying to work on acceleration, work on form, it was always from a 1 inch deficit, because I found at a 2 inch deficit my form changed too much. So the 1 inch deficit was enough for increased time under tension, a little bit longer pull, but with the same amount of force being driven through the legs and the same technique.
Another thing that really helped me is kind of incidental, but I trained back for years for sports prior to getting into powerlifting. And once I did, I had a really, really strong back, lots of rows, mainly barbell rows. But it allows me to keep a really strong and stable back when I go to pull the bar from the floor. So it was a really stable transfer of energy.
Before we get into the lockout, barbell rows, you see people do them so many different ways. What's your thought on kind of doing them strict, or like a Pendlay row, or Yates rows, and just those kind of different variations?
I train them several ways. If I'm really trying to just overload, I'll use straps, but a lot of times I go no straps and try to rep it out as many times. I pick a weight I can get between 5 and 10 times, and that's more grip work, but also helping my back strength.
Yeah, I think one of the best sayings I've ever heard is, a guy that I used to train with, he said, I've seen guys with huge arms, huge chests, and big legs that were weak. He said, I've never seen a guy with a big back that was weak. And he was a firm believer in barbell rows, as many as you could, for as much weight as you could, but he never went less than 5 reps. And you get to the point when you look at guys like very developed bodybuilders like Dorian Yates or Ronnie Coleman, they were also really, really strong guys, and both of those guys were foundational in their back progress around the barbell row. So to me, if you can barbell row significant amount of weight, say 60% of your deadlift for 5 to 8 repetitions, I think that's going to have a significant carryover to your deadlift, because when you're walking up to a 500-pound barbell, as we're all 800-plus pullers, if you're walking up to a 500-pound barbell and you're going to actually pull it higher than your hip joint for repetitions, it just becomes second nature to develop that kind of speed with the back and being in that bent position. I think it has a tremendous carryover, and it's something that I do, either do lat pull downs or barbell rows or dumbbell rows every single day that I work out.
Well, it's similar to what you were talking about. When I go to perform a barbell row, I'll break it from the ground a couple inches, and I try to maintain that torso position. So I'm essentially doing a light kind of pause deadlift the entire time.
So you like to do them strict then?
Yeah, I'll do them strict as much as I can.
Yeah.
And once I got heavier than that, then.
That's interesting, because I always pick them up like deadlift it up all the way, and then bend back down like an RDL and go. But
Yeah,
that's
I would say that I do actually like Brent says. I break the ground and I kind of hang there for a second, and then I start my row. So
I like that. I never even considered that. I like
Yeah.
that idea.
I like the pendulum row. It feels a lot like a deadlift to me, like how you just kind of pause and reset, and you kind of assume like a modified start position for the row. You know, I like the pendulum row, and I like the dumbbell rows too, like you guys were saying.
something that I've been toying with a little bit is a dedication to John Meadows. He actually kind of got me thinking on it, but I can't remember the actual name of the tool, but it's where you put the barbell in there and you can do the
Like grappler.
grappler. Okay,
Yeah.
but instead of doing
Land.
that, putting the dumbbell or the barbells in there and actually torquing yourself to where you have to pull back and then like stand it up with like 3 to 4 plates on each side, and then doing like a shrug or a high row with those. And that's really taught me to pull back from the floor because, you know, it's stuck in a corner and you can actually leverage yourself back. And that's one of the things that I used to be really problematic was I would pull forward. So the rows, you know, there's so many different variables that you can use. But, you know, like I said earlier in the talk out there was you have to take training, you have to take movements and make them your own. You know, I'm not necessarily a guy that likes to do lat pull downs, you know, straight down. I like to lean back a little bit and then reach to it because that helps my lat spread. Plus, it helps with my bench because I always strive to reach to the bench press. So, you know, if you're going to do rows, try to find a row that mimics some of your deadlift movement, you know.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that will apply best.
Because we're, talked about building strength off the floor. How are we building the lockout strength? Or improving the lockout, may not even be building strength.
Yeah. Just in general, to improve the lockout, usually if somebody's slow at the lockout, it starts with their starting position. I find that if you start in a position where you're flexed forward, you'll have issues with locking out. That may or may not be something that you want to fix. Not everybody wants to pull flat back. It matters the most weight that you can deadlift, so not necessarily one or the other will be better. But so if you pull round back or flat back, whatever the case, if you struggle with the lockout and you need to make the lockout stronger, I usually reach for deadlift with chains first, deadlift with bands next, rack pulls after that. If the first two aren't available, we'll go with rack pulls. I really tend to shy away from like reverse band deadlifts just because it seems like it just changes the movement a lot, and I found it tends to give people problems off the floor. So I usually go for rack pulls before I go for reverse bands.
Yeah, that's something that I think is really interesting because I'm glad you said that about the reverse bands, because when I first introduced some of the ideas with the cube, I was using reverse bands on deads and on the squat. But what I found was a lot of guys were going into just jerking the deadlift to create the momentum to accelerate the band rather than to actually learn to pull with the band. You'd see the elbow band and you'd see like the heave and pull. But yeah, for the lockout for me, Mike, he wrote an article a few years back that I remember really well, and it was stated that it's not necessarily just always a weakness. It's not necessarily your glutes or your hamstrings that are weak. It's just they may be out of position to be efficiently utilized. So again, one of the things that I picked up on from him and some other coaches is to finish strong, you have to start strong. And you have to get your technique down from the floor to the knee, and then from the knee to the lockout. And you have to figure out how your body positioned too far forward to get the hips through. Are you too erect to get the hips through? And a lot of times I want to tell guys to cut the weight down and just start hammering technique for a while, and then come back and try to do some heavier work. But for me, the go-tos would be, like you said, rack pulls. Maybe I'll go back to bands and chains one day, but for the moment, I'm really enjoying the straight weight, and I like I said, pauses just above the knee and then acceleration through the top, because that's where I really tend to slow down, is just above the knee. Anywhere from 50 to 70% seems to be adequate for my uses, and anywhere from as high as 5 reps down to 2 reps is what I try to utilize.
For me personally, I was having a lot of problems. I was driving my head back a lot, and I was kind of taking the glutes out of the equation. So I corrected that. Just this weekend, working with some people, I've seen a lot of that, and then a lot of toes pointing straight forward too. And those same people would also say that they have lockout problems. So I've also experienced that, so I'm putting my toes out more. And so just a couple technical things that have made a significant difference lately in my pull.
Just kind of on a bit of a related topic, I guess. For people that pull with a rounded over position, where their spine is flexed forward, I wouldn't really teach anybody to do that, but some people do and they like it. But if you pull with a flexed position and you want to change to a flat position, I've coached a few people through that change, and that's a really tough change to make. It takes a lot of discipline to keep the weight down, practice your technique properly, and it's taken a long time to fix. So if
is it technique or is it strength issue? Because one of my good friends actually is in the middle of making that transition.
Yeah, it's kind of both.
Yeah.
That when the weight gets heavy, they kind of go back to their stronger position, which is flex forward. Mm-hmm. So you have to hold the weight down to where you can keep a flat back position, and then the best way to think of it is just like a completely different exercise. This is a completely new movement. Forget the old PRs. These are new PRs, and you're developing this new movement pattern, and it takes a while. It takes a lot of discipline.
One of the things that I spoke about earlier also was, well, I don't think I spoke on it, but I talked to some people. Your body is going to find relative position to what it's comfortable doing, and I would argue that for most people, they don't differ very much from that beginning position. Even if they go into the professional level, there'll be some technical changes, but basically wherever you start in the positioning is where you're going to end up being, because your body's going to that movement progression for whatever reason. It feels comfortable there. So, one of the things that I look at for people on the deadlift is if they're conventional, like Brent mentioned, I kind of have them turn their toes out a little bit. And Mike mentioned it's a really hard thing to undo, a rounded position or an upright position to the other, because your body's just going to do what it wants to do. And so I feel like it's best to just work with what you've got, and unless there's really some impingement that warrants a full transition. It's like I tell people with sumo, you don't ever really see guys that pick up sumo and they're not good at it, and then 5 years later they're dominant at it. It's like the sumo technique tends to be a technique that you're either good at or you're not good at it. It's not something that you're just going to work at and become great. I mean, you can definitely improve at it, but it's like one of those things I just argue that you either get it or you don't. That's at least what I've seen.
Well, to continue with that point about sumo or conventional, what are some of the things that people should consider when deciding to pull sumo or conventional, and what is the value, if any, in your guys' opinion, for training the opposite stance?
I always train the opposite, just for the simple fact of I was in a meet where I was actually conditioned to pull sumo and hurt my groin in the squat, and all it was, the only way I could finish competitively was to pull conventional. And I trained up to a 765 sumo pull in training, and ended up pulling 785 conventional. And my best sumo to date is 785. My best conventional is 815. So that's an unlikely circumstance for most people, but the sumo work I do feel like has helped my hip strength, has helped my squat. I'm not very good at it, even though I'm strong at it. I'm not very. If you look at it, it's like, wow, that's not a very pretty sumo. But, it's more of a bullish type movement for me. But what I tell people is if you're flexible, if your back can stay erect, if you have longer arms, if you have strong hips, strong glutes, the sumo might be something to experiment with. But I encourage everybody to try it, for no other reason than you can get a different work of muscles working together.
I'm pretty inexperienced with it, so I don't really have an opinion on as far as transitioning from one to the other. But personally, just from the limited times I pulled sumo, noticing how sore my hips were, and my groin area, my glutes and everything. I can tell it's a beneficial lift and something I definitely want to improve that. I mean, I think it would have at least some carryover in my squats.
Yeah. I've seen like articles and stuff that have these different equations for like if your arm is this long, and I mean you guys know me, I'm an equation kind of guy, but I've never been able to make those work in real life. So it's always kind of come back down to just try it, give it a good couple weeks, and see how it fleshes out in real life, and kind of make a determination there. And if they're real close and you can't decide, then I would train them both. But if one is dominantly more strong than the other, like for me, I used to deadlift sumo. I just started out sumo because that's what I was told you were supposed to do, so that's what I did. And then I was getting really frustrated with my pull, and I think it was probably, this was back, I was like a high 500 kind of pull. I was getting really frustrated, and one day I said, screw it, I'm going to do conventional. Pulled 635 the first time. So like a 50-pound PR the first time, and then I started training it, and it was increasing a lot all at once, so I just kept on with it. I mean, for that, it's like, okay, obviously conventional. So if you're in a situation like that, then for me, I say keep it specific. If you're definitely a sumo puller, then I tend to coach guys to train sumo. If you're definitely conventional, I tend to have them train conventional.
I see the sumo pull tends to be, in a loose definition, more like a weightlift. You see a lot more guys miss it just because of mistiming, or their technique gets slightly off, whereas a conventional puller, there can be some mistakes, it seems, and they can kind of work their way through it. But, the sumo lift tends to be, I think, guys that I think of that pull conventional very well tend to probably be more fast twitch guys, guys that can actually just speed through the lift, and not necessarily have the grinding power per se of a conventional type puller. And I think that's why the suit also lends itself better to sumo lifters because of the acceleration factor. You see guys getting a lot of carryover out of their suit, but you look at Believ, he's pulling 862 at 198 or 220, whatever it was. And I think it was 198, he pulled the 862. And it looked like, it did truly look like a speed pull. And then you look at Positive, it's the same thing. He pulled 892 at 242, and it was essentially a speed pull. Now, the next 5 pounds may not even break the ground. And that just, to me, that mimics what you see in weightlifting. Guys can just dominate the weight, and then, one more kilo, and it throws everything off. So, I don't know, it's just, like Mike said, probably the best thing to do is give it a run and just go by feel.
The deadlift's probably the most taxing exercise on your body, and I think really a unique beast among the three powerlifts in that it doesn't really react the same way as the other two to certain types of programming, and frequency is probably the biggest issue with that. So what do you see as deadlifting frequency that's worked for you guys, maybe that you see as a better thing for beginners, or just your insights to frequency?
I don't know. I'm probably on the fringe on this one because
we'll get all opinions.
Yeah, I deadlift pretty frequently. I deadlift twice a week, and I squat 3 times a week. And I definitely don't see a problem for most people squatting or deadlifting rather at least every week and gradually phasing up the frequency over time. I think it's like any other lift that you got to build that volume over time to get better at it. But at the same time, I was talking to Sam Bird last night, and he was telling me about his experience and that he's had the opposite experience. So I guess nobody's got it all figured out, but it's the direction I usually go in.
For me, I pull every single week. I have 2 building weeks, or that's what I call them, is building weeks. One is explosive, using 50 to 60%, or now I'm using a little bit more, 60 to 70% on my explosive days. My rep days are anywhere from 65 to 75 or 80%. And then the third week is rep testing. I'll either do a heavy 5, a heavy triple, or a heavy double you know, and then it's right back to an explosive week, then a rep week, then a heavy week. But yeah, I think there is something to be said for pulling twice a week, because I did that for a long time and I got a lot better. And then I hit a wall and it was, okay, you can't smash through this wall going straight forward, so you're going to have to kind of come back and change some things around. And, you know, you just have to be willing to adapt to whatever your body's feedback is. You know, Sam is going through something that I went through. I had a 2-year sticking point on the deadlift, and I tried to pull more and more and more, and then I tried to pull less and less and less, and I was like, you know what, I'm just not going to pull for a while. I did some strongman stuff, I did some stones, I did some, you know, log deadlifts, just some unconventional type training, come back, and a few months later, and I hit a deadlift PR. So sometimes you just, as much as we said earlier, sometimes fixing your technique can help. Sometimes you just have to step back and give it a break, you know, or, as Mike said, sometimes you just have to up the frequency. But there's no right or wrong answer. No matter what we say, you have to apply it to yourself, and you have to try different things. I would say that Mike would thrive on just about any system because he's that type of person. I would say that Brent would do the same, but there is going to be a method that will, not a method, but a technique or a system that will make them gain better. It's just, you've got to find what works for you.
I pulled weekly or twice weekly up until about mid-sevens, and I lowered it a couple of years ago, and now I'm pulling about once every 10 to 14 days. But most of my problems in competition recently have been technique issues, so I could probably need to find a middle ground somewhere. But I think it's one of those things that can be a personal issue. And I know people that can pull twice a week, and I know people that, you know, do a lot better only pulling once a month. So it's something you kind of need to assess for yourself.
Any closing thoughts to leave the deadlifters of the internet with?
I think the most important thing, whether it's in training, whether it's at the meet, probably the best advice I ever got is to stop paying attention to what's on the bar and just pull hard, or pull your hardest. Because when you start trying to equate physical exertion to what's on the bar, like, oh, this is 500 pounds, so I'm going to pull 500 with just enough force to pull 500 pounds, you actually limit your ability to pull. If you start pulling everything as hard as you possibly can, you don't have, that's just a variable that doesn't come into play when it's time to pull big. You know, when I used to approach the bar for a PR, I would kind of have those, okay, I got to get hyped up for this, I've got to do this, and really get jacked up. And then I watch Mike, who trains by himself, most of the time in silence, and just seems to walk up to the bar and just do his thing. I was like, you know what? What if I'm at a meet and I can't replicate that intensity that day? What if I can't get stimulated because the song's not just right or whatever? So I started calming myself down in training and just pulling as hard as I could on everything, whether it was 2 plates or whether it was 8 plates aside, giving every single rep the same respect. And what I noticed over time was it became easier and easier and easier to start pulling PRs, because in my head I was approaching the bar every time as if it were a PR. So take every rep serious, pay attention strictly to your technique, film yourself, become obsessive about that, and if things don't feel right, stop, step back, go again, you know, make every single rep count. That's the way I look at it.
Right on.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.